Yet the idea of Asia and a spirit of Asian universalism were alive and articulated in a variety of registers during the period of European colonial domination. Okakura Kakuzo's 1903 book, The Ideals of the East, had a memorable first sentence: Asia is one. There were multiple articulations and alternative visions of this famous claim, and the extent to which it was tenable. The idea of Asia formed the subject of vigorous intellectual debates. Asia as a space and a concept in the writings of Asian thinkers, many variations of them notwithstanding, contained a creative spark absent in the European cartographic depictions of Asia. One of the most innovative exponents of an Asia sense was Rabindranath Tagore, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913 for the book Gitanjali, from which Dr. Lalita Sinha just read to you. In today's lecture, I will explore the intellectual, cultural, and political conversations across Asia conducted by Tagore and his contemporaries. Such an exploration may give us fresh insights into the modern intellectual history of Asia, as well as theories of universalism, cosmopolitanism, and internationalism. Each country of Asia will solve its own historical problems according to its strength, nature, and need, Tagore said during his visit to Iran in 1932. But the lamp that they will each carry on their path to progress will converge to illuminate the common ray of knowledge. It is only when the light of the spirit glows that the bond of humanity becomes true. In my book, 100 Horizons, I had claimed that Tagore was an eloquent exponent and proponent of a universalist aspiration, albeit a universalism with a difference. This specific claim was part of a larger contention that modern history could be interpreted as an interplay of multiple and competing universalisms, rather than as a clash of civilizations. The colonized did not simply erect defensive walls around their notions of cultural difference. They were keen to be players in broad arenas of cosmopolitan thought zones and wished to contribute to the shaping of a global future. Universalism, cosmopolitanism, and internationalism are words and concepts jostling for interpretive space in new global, interregional, and transnational histories. Champions of cosmopolitanism, who see detached reason as its only source, display a visceral distaste for patriotism, confusing it with the narrowest forms of particularism. Colorless cosmopolitanism is assigned a high moral ground. Colorful patriotism is deemed to be seductive but devoid of any ethical content. A figure like Rabindranath Tagore can be annexed to this version of cosmopolitanism by denuding him of all of his poetry and music, and all of his passion and moral philosophy. Tagore undoubtedly was a powerful critic of worshipping the nation as God, and was horrified by the crimes committed by modern nation-states. Yet he loved the land that had nurtured him and never abandoned an anti-colonial stance. He simply did not want Indian patriots to imitate European nationalists. It is not without reason that Mahatma Gandhi, in his obituary comment on Rabindranath Tagore in 1941, lauded the poet as an ardent nationalist. There were various forms of patriotism perfectly compatible with a cosmopolitan attitude that transcended the lines of particular cultural differences. The history of colorful cosmopolitanism is a salutary antidote to the philosophical hubris of the votaries of colorless cosmopolitanism. It was this colorful cosmopolitanism that Tagore represented. The Swadeshi, or own country cultural milieu of early 20th century India, despite its interest in rejuvenating indigenous traditions and industries, was not inward-looking. Its protagonists were curious about innovations in different parts of the globe and felt comfortable within ever-widening concentric circles of Bengali patriotism, Indian nationalism, and Asian universalism. Aspiring to reconcile a sense of nationality with a common humanity, they were not prepared to let colonial borders constrict their imaginations. Okakura conveyed the spirit of Asian universalism to India. The Harvard scholar of Japanese art, Ernest Francisco Fenollosa, had mentored him. Okakura would later catalogue Fenollosa's magnificent collection of Japanese and Chinese paintings for the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Okakura first came to India in 1902. Sister Nivedita, the Irish-born disciple of Swami Vivekananda, wrote an introduction to his book, The Ideals of the East, and introduced Okakura to the Tagore family in Calcutta. A cultural and political bridge between East and South Asia was forged. Okakura sent the famous Japanese artists Taikan Yokoyama and Shunso Hishida to Calcutta. Abanindranath Tagore, Rabindranath's nephew, learned the Japanese wash technique from Taikan and painted the iconic image Bharat Mata, Mother India. This is a sketch by Nandolal of the southern veranda of the Tagore mansion, where all the artists and intellectuals used to gather and talk. And you can see A.K. Kumaraswamy as one of the figures there. And this is the iconic image of Bharat Mata. And I think it is truly significant that this iconic image of the Indian nation as mother was executed in the Japanese wash technique. With European nationalisms in a deadly embrace during World War I, Rabindranath Tagore journeyed in an easterly direction aboard the Japanese ship Tosamaru on May 3, 1916. Traveling on this easterly route for the first time in his life, Tagore encountered a mighty storm in the Bay of Bengal that left no dividing line between the clouds and the waves. Someone seemed to have opened the blue lid of the ocean, and countless demons had emerged from below, wrapped in grey coils of smoke, as in the Arabian Nights, and were shooting up to the sky. After 4 days at sea, the appearance of birds in the sky signaled that land was near. If the ocean was the domain of dance, its shores heralded a realm of music. As the ship moved up the Irrawaddy towards Rangoon, Tagore observed the row of kerosene oil factories with tall chimneys along its banks, as if Burma was lying on its back and smoking a cigar. From Burma, the Tosamaru traveled further east towards Penang, Singapore, and Hong Kong. As the sun was setting on May 12, 1916, Tagore's ship arrived in Penang, leading the poet to reflect on the beauty of this world. Yet as he drew closer to the shore, he lamented the mocking and ugly expression of human greed that had led human beings to be exiled from heaven. And I understand from Dato Anwar that this contestation is going on between environmentalists trying to protect beauty and the search for economic wealth. The poet felt a sense of joy observing the strength and skill of Chinese laborers working at the port in Hong Kong, and made an uncannily accurate prophecy about the future balance of power in the world. The nations which now own the world's resources, Tagore argued, fear the rise of China and wish to postpone the day of that rise. It was in the midst of another frightening storm, this time in the South China Sea, on May 21, 1916, that Tagore composed his song, Bhubanojora Ashonakhani, asking the Almighty to spread his seat of universality in the individual's heart. Your universe-encompassing prayer mat, spread it out in the core of my heart. The night stars, the day's sun, all the shades of darkness and light, all your messages that fill the sky, let them find their abode in my heart. May the lute of the universe fill the depths of my soul with all its tunes, all the intensity of grief and joy, the flowers touch, the storms touch. Let your compassionate, auspicious, generous hands bring into the core of my heart. On May 29, 1916, the Tosamaru reached the Japanese port of Kobe. Tagore's 3-month sojourn in Japan represented the fulfillment not just of a personal quest, but the search for an Asian universalism that had begun at the turn of the century. Tagore's direct encounter with the power and scale of art in Japan led him to urge Indian painters to look east in order to pioneer a fresh departure from the Swadeshi corpus of ideas. Japanese art impressed him. The Japanese penchant for imitating European nationalistic imperialism less so. It was only after rebuking Japan on that count that Tagore undertook the long Pacific crossing to North America on September 7, 1916. While he was in Japan, Tagore had received an invitation to visit Vancouver. He flatly rejected it. Well aware of the Komagata Maru incident of 1914, when prospective Indian immigrants, mostly Sikhs, had been turned away from Vancouver Harbour, Tagore refused to travel to Canada and Australia until these dominions withdrew their discriminatory immigration policies. Ironically, the ship that took Tagore across the Pacific was named Canada Maru. However, he disembarked in Seattle, and then he lectured in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Pasadena, and following that, traveled from the West Coast to the East, speaking out against nationalism. This was the presidential election season in America of 1916. Woodrow Wilson was campaigning with his slogan, "He kept us out of war." And Wilson won by a narrow margin, which I believe Obama might, with perhaps even a narrower margin later this year. The nation with a capital N, Tagore declared in his speech, The Cult of Nationalism, in Carnegie Hall, New York. With all its paraphernalia of power and prosperity, its flags and pious hymns, its blasphemous prayers in the churches, and the literary mock thunders of its patriotic bragging, cannot hide the fact that the nation is the greatest evil for the nation. Tagore's critique of nationalism was, however, compatible with his basic anti-colonial stand and his patriotic poetry. This is a picture by Mukul De of Tagore lecturing in America. Mukul De came with Tagore to Penang and then on to Japan in 1916. If Swadeshi nationalism had forged connections with Asian universalism, the non-cooperation and Khilafat movement led by Mahatma Gandhi in the aftermath of World War I was inextricably linked with the evocation of an Islamic universalism. Let Hindus not be frightened by pan-Islamism, Gandhi had written in his journal Young India. It is not, it need not be anti-Indian or anti-Hindu. In exhorting Hindus to extend support to Muslims on the Khilafat question, Gandhi saw no contradiction between a territorial conception of nationalism and an extraterritorial anti-colonial sentiment. With the waning of the Khilafat movement and the abolition of the institution by Kemal Atatürk in 1924, Indian nationalists once again turned towards the dream of an Asian universalism. In 1924, Tagore traveled once more by sea to Burma, China, and Japan. The poet's entourage always included a small but formidable team of intellectuals and artists. On this particular voyage in 1924, his companions from Shantiniketan were the painter Nandalal Bose and Khiti Mohan Sen, an erudite scholar of Sanskrit and comparative religion, who happens to be the grandfather of Amartya Sen. Tagore spent a day in Penang, en route to China, and was taken round the city in a procession, a large procession, we are told, that commenced at the home of a local advocate, Mr. P.K. Nambiar. And this is a sketch of Rabindranath done by Nandalal in Penang during that 1924 voyage. In welcoming Tagore to China, Liang Qiqiao evoked the age-old brotherly affection between India and China. The radical Chinese youth who had their baptism of fire in the May 4th movement of 1919 mistook the modern Indian poet to be a traditionalist and derided the messenger of spirituality from a defeated nation. Tagore's advocacy of a shared Asian cultural ecumene had a mixed reception. Hurt by the passage of the Orientals Exclusion Act in the United States, Tagore's friends and admirers set up an Asiatic association in Shanghai to further the cause of Asian unity. It was as an intellectual pilgrim that in July 1927, the poet traveled east from Madras on the French ship Amboise. India's learning had once spread outside India, Tagore wrote on July 15, 1927, from his ship in the Bay of Bengal. But the people outside accepted it. We have embarked on this pilgrimage, Tirthajatra was the Bengali word used, to see the signs of the history of India's entry into the universal. Tagore's visit to the Malay Peninsula in 1927 gave him a chance to have a conversation with the Chinese literati. The Chinese had named the Indian poet, forgive my Chinese pronunciation, Chu Chen Tan, Thunder and Sunlight of India, based on the following equations: Robi equals Tan equals morning sun, Indra equals Chen equals thunder, India equals Thien Chu equals heavenly kingdom. Among the Malay Chinese Tagore met was the barrister Song Ong Siang, who had authored a book titled 100 Years of Chinese in Singapore, 1819 to 1919. This book had come out in 1923. Another was Dr. Lim Boon Keng, who along with Song had run the Straits Chinese magazine from 1897 to 1907. In 1911, Lim had gone to Europe to take part in the Universal Races Congress in London. He was by now the head of Amoy University, but as a product of the famous Raffles School, retained close ties with the city, founded by Raffles. Lim Boon Keng had recently completed an English translation of the Li Xiao, an elegy on encountering sorrows, by the 4th century BC Chinese poet Chu Yuan. Tagore was much enchanted by the life, work, and death of Chu, who had in the end drowned himself in the Milo River in Hunan. Once Lim sent him a copy of his manuscript, Tagore wrote a foreword for the book in Penang. A trip to the Malay Peninsula was unthinkable without including a visit to Malacca. From Malacca, the sea presented a serene spectacle. The ocean beach was spread out in front of the poet in the shape of a half moon. The color of the shallow waters made the sea look as if it was clad in the earth's saffron end of a sari. On the left were coconut trees leaning on one another for support. A group of Punjabi Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh men came to pay their homage to the poet in Malacca. According to the Muslim, Tagore was not only a poet of the highest caliber, but by the grace of Khudat Allah had also attained tasawwuf, or enlightenment of a Sufi mystic. But the idyll was soon to be rudely disturbed. Subbaya Naidu came to Malacca to tell Tagore about the dismal condition of Indian laborers on the rubber plantations, of whom most were from southern India, especially what is now Tamil Nadu. Some of the British rubber barons seemed unhappy with the Indian poet's triumphal progress through the Malay Peninsula. On 2nd August 1927, the Malay Tribune published an editorial on Dr. Tagore's politics, which was a blistering attack on Tagore for something he had purportedly written in the Shanghai Times. Tagore was quoted as having said that Asia was preparing her weapons in her armories for a target that was bound to be the heart of Europe. Tagore had actually not written or said anything to the Chinese paper. When he had visited China in 1924, he had been greatly disturbed to see the brutal use of Sikh armed police against the Chinese in Shanghai, and written a Bengali article protesting against the British practice of using Indian troops overseas. An English translation of the article was published in the Modern Review in early 1927, which then got recycled in garbled form in the Shanghai Times and the Malay Tribune. An energetic young Tamil scholar in Malaya noticed the distortions, and the Indian paper, Malayan Daily Express, published a strong rejoinder under the title Anti-Tagore Bubble Pricked, an object lesson in dishonest journalism. Before leaving British Malaya for the Dutch East Indies, Tagore delivered a lecture in Penang on August 15, 1927, urging Asian patriots not to follow the path of European nationalists. The following day, Tagore set off from Penang on board the Kuala for Singapore. As his connecting ship, the Plancius journeyed from Singapore across the Straits of Malacca towards Batavia, Tagore wrote his poem Sri Vijaya Lakshmi, celebrating the renewal of a bond after a 1,000-year separation. He let Surendranath Kaur take the lead in keeping a visual record of the journey, still reluctant to let his own drawings and sketches come before the public eye. As you can see, this painting was done by Suren Kaur on board the SS Plancius, Singapore, 18th August of 1927. After his departure from Bali, Rabindranath wrote one of his most beautiful poems, which was later renamed more generically Sagorika, or Sea Maiden, of which the opening verse read, "The Bengali words are Sagoro jale sinanakuri shojolo elo chule, boshia chile upolo upokule." The translation might read, "Having bathed in the sea with your wet tresses, you sat on the rocky beach. Your loose yellow robe drew a forbidding line around you on the earth. On your uncovered breasts and unadorned body, the morning sun painted a gentle golden hue. With a Makara-crested crown on my forehead, bow and arrow in hand, I appeared royally adorned and said, I have come from another land." The Makara crest, the crocodilesque symbol, motif, is a very common one all across the Indian Ocean world. From Bali, Tagore traveled to Surabaya on the predominantly Muslim island of Java. Hosted by the family of the 7th Mongkonegoro of Suryakarta, he was amazed by the extent to which the stories of the Ramayana and Mahabharata suffused the dance and drama of the Muslim Javanese. The veranda of the Raja's home was decorated with beautiful silk scrolls on which the events of the Ramayana were painted. In Jogjakarta, Tagore was a guest of the local ruler. The Sultan's daughters danced, and the entire family got together to perform the story of the killing of the great bird Jatayu in the Ramayana. Tagore lamented the lack of more comparative studies of the epic. "One day, some German scholar will do this work," he wrote. "After that, by protesting against or substantiating that thesis, we will earn PhDs in the university." Now, Tagore believed that the Southeast Asian versions of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata were as original as the many Indian versions of those same epics. On the ship Mayar, traveling from Java to Singapore, Tagore wrote what was to become one of his most popular songs. "Shokoruno benu bajaye ke jaye bideshi nae, tahari ragini lagilo gaye." Who goes playing that plaintive flute on a foreign boat? I can feel the touch of that melody. The unknown anguish of whose faraway forlorn heart comes floating, riding that tune on the ocean shore's restless breeze in the shadow of the woods. Listening to it today in my solitary foreign abode, Bhairavi wet with autumn dew sounds silently in the depth of my heart. An image comes to mind in light and song, as if on the desolate river path, who goes to the water to fill her pitcher with languid footsteps in the shadow of the woods. Another boat, named Kinta, brought the poet from Singapore to Penang on October 5th, 1927. From Wellesley railway station, he traveled by train to Bangkok. His poem, Siam, composed on October 11, 1927, gave expression to Tagore's search for an India that crossed its own borders. Aji ami tare dekhi lobo, bharoter je mohima, tag kori ashiache apono ongon shima, orgho dibo tare, bharot bahire tobo dare. Today I will bear witness to India's glory that transcended its own boundaries. I will pay it homage outside India at your door. He returned by train to Penang before departing on his return voyage to India. Here, on October 18, 1927, he composed a poem titled Chirantan, Forever, and a beautiful song as well. During the 1910s, Tagore had been shocked by the carnage triggered by rival European nationalisms. The decade of the 1930s showed that Asia was by no means immune from that virus. In his 1932 book, In Persia, Paroshe, Tagore recalled how he had watched with admiration the early stirrings of an awakening in easternmost Asia. He was disappointed that Japan had caught the European disease. He had now come to West Asia to see how that part of the world was coping with the challenges of the new age. He had not given up all hope on Asia's ability to illuminate a different path towards the ideal of universal humanity. Japan's invasion of China in 1937 undermined the idea of Asia as never before. In October 1937, Subhash Chandra Bose published a long essay in the Modern Review titled Japan's Role in the Far East. To some degree, it was a realist analysis of international power relations in East Asia. Towards the end, the author revealed where his sympathies lay. Japan, he conceded, had done great things for herself and for Asia. He recalled how Japan had been a beacon of inspiration for all of Asia at the dawn of the 20th century. But, he asked, could not Japan's aims be achieved without imperialism, without dismembering the Chinese Republic, without humiliating another proud, cultured, and ancient race? No, he replied, with all our admiration for Japan, where such admiration is due, our whole heart goes out to China in her hour of trial. China, he prophesied, would once again rise phoenix-like from the ashes. He then went on to draw some ethical lessons for India from the conflict in East Asia. Standing at the threshold of a new era, he wrote, "Let India resolve to aspire after national self-fulfillment in every direction, but not at the expense of other nations, and not through the bloody path of self-aggrandizement and imperialism." The 1940s would turn out to be a turbulent decade for Bengal, India, Asia, and indeed the whole world. Rabindranath Tagore passed away in August 1941, having lamented in the last year of his life the tendency of human civilization to kill itself with its own dagger. Nandalal Bose's painting Annapurna captures the tragedy of the Great Bengal Famine of 1943, in which 3 million people died. He created this haunting image of Annapurna and Rudra. Annapurna, who is seated on a lotus, holds a bowl of rice in her hands. Before her stands Shiva, reduced to a skeleton, holding a begging bowl. In 1939, Tagore had granted Subhash Chandra Bose the appellation Deshnayak, leader of the country. As Bengal's poet, Tagore wrote with his usual literary flair, "I invite you to the honored seat of the leader of the people.